Okay, welcome. Today I'd like to offer a little reflection about recovering from childhood trauma and the healing process. I'm going to talk about 3 steps that Judith Herman talks about. So, enjoy. Okay, welcome. So we've had some lovely spring weather here over the past week or so, and I've been outside reading, preparing. So in days time, tomorrow morning, I'm going to be interviewing my podcast Christine Jack, who's written this book, Recovering Boarding. I'm trying to read it backwards. Boarding School Trauma Narratives, and yeah, it's really good, this book. If you've been to boarding school or had some form of trauma, then this is fascinating. What she does is she interweaves her own story of boarding school. She was at boarding school in Australia with nuns, and she interweaves it with the story of Christopher Robin Milne, who was A.A. Milne's son, and from the stories of Winnie the Pooh, Christopher Robin. So he was sent to boarding school at age 9, and yeah, I've just found this really fascinating. So yeah, I'm looking forward to interviewing her tomorrow, and we will be talking about some of this trauma. She's a historian, so some of the history behind it, and yeah, kind of moving forward, whether there really is a place for boarding schools. What I wanted to talk a little bit today about was this idea of healing childhood trauma and the process of the process of recovery from trauma. What she talks about in this book, which comes from Judith Herman's work, Judith Herman, foundational leader in the field of trauma and recovery. She talks about these 3 stages that we go through, and I find this is fascinating for those people who've been on my men's circles. The idea of, I've done a circle on initiation. Robert talks about these 3 key stages of initiation. Mircea Eliade also talks about these 3 steps, and Judith Herman, it's fascinating, talks about these 3 kind of levels again, and she's saying that these 3 levels are: the first one is this safe space. So we need to have a safe space in order for us to open up. In my own life, that was in my 20s, arriving in a Buddhist monastery. It was that safe space. And she said and so that might be, that might be a therapist. It might be a coach, somebody to hold that space as you start to process the trauma that you went through. Second stage she talks about is remembrance and mourning, which is inherently turbulent and complex. And Robert Moore, in his work, talks about this second stage being the extraordinary space. So they talk about liminal space, similar thing, that we go into this extraordinary space, which can be quite challenging. And the idea here, she's saying, it involves not only remembering the event, but also reconnecting with all the associated thoughts and feelings. And I think this is one of the keys. So you've heard me speak about the trauma healing model that I'm kind of putting together in my book at the moment. And the trauma healing model is like, in stage 1, we're in disconnection. So we can say, when we're in stage 1, so there's 3 stages with the trauma healing model. In stage 1 is disconnection, and I can talk about boarding school. I can say, yeah, it was hard, but it was, I got through it. It really taught me how to be a good, strong man. But there's no emotional connection. So what Judith Herman is talking about is that we have to connect to the feeling. I remember in my own therapeutic journey, 2002, seeing therapists, and I would make them cry, telling them my stories of what went on at boarding school. And it was like but I couldn't connect to it. I had this wall, this exoskeleton around me. So I feel this is really, really important, that we have to connect to the emotion. We have to connect to that trauma, let the tears go. And in the work I do with clients, it's more a case that we go in and we visit the younger self. We give them the space to feel the trauma. We don't need to go in to that space ourselves, but we give the space for the younger self to feel that. And then for Judith Herman, the third level is recovery, is reconnection with ordinary life. Again, Robert Moore talks about those three levels. So the middle level is the extraordinary space, and he says the third level is returning. Joseph Campbell talks about this idea of taking the boon. What have you learned? You take that back into the world. So you've had your therapy. So it's a bit like me with my work. I had my breakdown, had my trauma, I went through the extraordinary space, and then I returned to the ordinary world. I left the monastery, I left my therapeutic process. So I feel, those are those three steps. This idea is reconnecting with ordinary life, but taking your gifts back in. So I feel one of the gifts from boarding school is compassion. It's like, on one level, the psychological impact of it is like, it's huge. Childhood trauma, it's big. And if we've worked through it and we've come to stage 3, we go back into ordinary world, we have a gift that we can take back into society. And Robert Bly talks about this, that he's saying in the book Iron John, the idea that where our gold is where our gift is. So often I feel in stage 1 of the trauma healing model, the disconnection, we feel we have no wound and therefore we have no gold. Stage 3 is integration. We understand we have a gold and therefore we have something to give. And that's what I feel is really key. When we've done that inner healing work, we then have something to give back to the world. And I feel that's key for healing, is having some purpose, to going, right, I've been through this experience, now I can support others. I've been through this experience, I can share that with others, and that will enable others to feel that as well. And the last thing I really wanted to talk about here, this was also from Judith Herman, just saying that she found that for those who suffer from childhood trauma, it may only be in the 3rd or 4th decade of life that the defensive structure may begin to break down. And I think that's really kind of been interesting for me over the last few years. I've had people contact me from my school, friends or colleagues, and realizing that, this is key. When I spoke to them, because I went through my own breakdown in my 20s, they couldn't really get it when I speak to them in my 20s. Now that they're in their 40s, a lot of them are going, God, that I really see the trauma. Oh my God. It's like their defensive mechanism is starting to break down. So if you feel you're in your 20s, and you're coming across this, great. Most people come across this, the 30s, 40s, 50s, going, oh my God, and getting that insight about it. So I think that's what I want to share today. So I'll be speaking to Christine Jack tomorrow, and I will put this live on Friday unless I have to edit it. I also managed to speak to Pete Walker this week, who is the author of CPTSD, Complex Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, and he is up for coming on the podcast as well. He's very busy. He's very kind of well known in this field, and he, I don't know when he'll come on. And then next week I'm speaking to Simon Hinckley, who is an elder in the Mankind Project, just about eldership. If we've been through trauma, especially if we've been separated from adults, like in boarding school, we don't really have a clear idea of what an elder is, what that enabled, that means, because often we were brought up by girls and boys. That's who we were around most of the time. So I really like to have that conversation, like, right, what is it to be a man? You know, what is it to be a woman, to be an elder? So that's next week. So yeah, any questions, please let me know. You know, and yeah, thank you so much for your time and doing this healing work. It's so important. The more I do this work, the more I see that this web, especially about trauma, especially about boarding school trauma, how much it is linked into leadership across the world. You know, most kind of wealthy families send their children to boarding school now. So we have this trauma, and it's around the world. So therefore, it really needs to be looked at, brought into the open, and healed. So needs to be healed. So, thank you so much for your time, and yeah, many blessings.